All good? Can you hear me okay, everybody? All right, sound good? Thank you so much for being here today and joining us for this lake-friendly landscaping workshop. My name is Bree Rossiter. I am the Conservation Program Manager for the Lake Winnipesaukee Association. In my role, I help supervise the Water Quality Monitoring Program, our Lake Smart program. I help implement projects that are identified in watershed management plans, and do anything else that the organization might need to help protect the lake. So the Lake Winnipesaukee Association is the only nonprofit that is focused on protecting Lake Winnipesaukee and its watershed for future generations. We do this in a variety of ways, through our monitoring program, science-guided approaches for lake management, education, and restoration as well. Our mission is to protect the water quality and natural resources of Lake Winnie and its watershed. The cyanobacteria blooms that we have been experiencing over the last 2 weeks has proven that our mission is now more important than ever. In 2021, the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center for Public Policy at Dartmouth completed a qualitative report, and it estimated the value of Lake Winnipesaukee to the New Hampshire economy at close to $17 billion. I'm not going to go into all the details of this today, but the report is on our website for anyone else that may be interested. So what is a watershed? A watershed is an area of land that drains to a lake or a pond. You can think of it as a giant bowl, so whatever happens in the watershed ends up draining to the lake. 30, 40, 50 years ago, we really didn't understand the impacts that our activities would have. Roads, development, infrastructure, all of this was done with an inadequate understanding of the potential environmental consequences. In fact, much of our infrastructure sends stormwater away from properties and roads and drains directly through culverts into the lake. During this time, the water picks up anything in its path, not only trash and debris, but also nutrients, sediment, and other pollutants that are more difficult or maybe even impossible to see. So what is the concern with all of this? Watersheds that are mostly forested allow for a natural filtration of pollutants prior to reaching the water body. Plants help to stabilize the soil, minimize flood risk, and increase biodiversity. Highly developed watersheds are a concern because they do not have natural filters and instead rely on said infrastructure to direct the stormwater away from residential and urbanized landscapes and historically into our water bodies. In general, developed watersheds contribute 5 to 10 times the amount of phosphorus than forested watersheds. I can move it a little closer to me. I just didn't want it to be too loud. Is that better for everybody? Okay. Still more closer. Okay. How's that? A little bit better? Even better than that? Okay, great. The main threat that we are concerned with is phosphorus. So it is a naturally occurring element in nature, but it's found in very, very small amounts, and it is the limiting nutrient for most freshwater lakes, including Lake Winnipesaukee. Phosphorus is essential for the growth of aquatic plants and algae, but it can adversely affect the lake when there are increased levels. So I said it's a limiting nutrient, and what does that mean? What it means that in short supply, it can hinder the growth of any primary producers, which in turn affects the entire food web and ecosystem dynamics. But on the other hand, when in excess, it can spur that growth of plants, algae, and cyanobacteria. Phosphorus has a significant role in the function and ecological health of many lake systems. But how does it actually get into our water bodies? A few ways are through polluted stormwater runoff. That is the #1 contributor of phosphorus to most freshwater lakes in New Hampshire. Failing septic systems are also a contributor. Erosion, any recreational pressures, increased development, and fertilizer as well. 1 pound of phosphorus can support 500 pounds of algae growth, which is why this is so important. So in response to the increase of cyanobacteria alerts, in 2022, Lake Winnipesaukee Association created a tracking map for all of the cyanobacteria advisories, observations, alerts within Lake Winnipesaukee. We track all observations and blooms throughout the summer season. That map is on the bottom left. While the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services map is only tracking any active warnings or alerts. The language for our reporting for cyanobacteria has changed since last year. Our advisories are now called warnings. So what we refer to as an observation includes things like photographic evidence of a bloom, even if it's not sampled, but alerts are issued, or warnings are issued by the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services when cell counts exceed 70,000 cells per milliliter. If you suspect cyanobacteria, the Department of Environmental Services should be your primary source for reporting these suspected blooms. You can also sign up on their water body or on their website to receive water body specific updates, and you can join our email list to receive additional updates from LWA. In 2021, we had 14 observations of cyanobacteria, so 14 times people calling in and saying, I think I have a cyanobacteria bloom on my shoreline or something like that. But if samples were collected, the cell counts did not exceed that potential public health risk. In 2022, we had 17 observations and 4 advisories. And so that is just on Winnipesaukee and does not include Lake Kanasaka or the Winnipesaukee River, which also experienced a bloom. In 2023, it was a slow season for us. You know, we had about 10 observations and 2 advisories comparative. In 2024, within the last 2 weeks, we have received over 20 reports of cyanobacteria blooms on Lake Winnipesaukee since last Wednesday. NHDES has changed how they're reporting things on their map. This year, the warnings are less localized, covering large areas of the lake. The shift in their reporting is due to an increase in the frequency and size of these blooms across multiple areas of the lake, showing less concentrations in one specific area. Compared to last year, we have 10 locations under cyanobacteria warnings and at least 20 additional locations where blooms have been reported. Those cyanobacteria warnings, again, are issued when there's a potential human health risk or risk to pets as well. So we ask that you please take these reports seriously, and if you decide to recreate in the water, visually assess it first and make sure that the water looks clear. The current map and report card on our website is actually from 2023 information. We haven't been able to update it yet for this year, but it will be updated by the end of the week with all of the observations and the warnings that have been reported on Winnipesaukee on Friday. So on the right is our report card. That's something that we're going to be putting out weekly on our website as well as our social media. And so it includes any cyanobacteria warnings, any cyanobacteria alerts, the water temp, and the lake level. Additionally, you can use the QR code on the bottom to report any potential blooms to NHDES, or just type in Bloom Report Tool into Google. So I just wanted to share some photos of some of the bloom photos that we've received over the last week and a half, just showing kind of the extent of these blooms. I'm going to actually ask that we just wait for questions till the end. What? Yep, that's with the cyanobacteria. Yep, I'd like to just get through this section first, and then we'll ask questions and do that. So, I'd just like to share some of the photos that we've received. The top left is Cedar Cove. The second one I know is the broad side of Rattlesnake Island. I believe the third one is Center Harbor Beach, the town beach. The fourth one is Bear Island in Meredith. There's some additional ones as well off of various islands. So this is what we're seeing in our lakes, and it is potentially toxic, specifically to kids and pets, because the greatest risk of toxins are through ingestion. So if we're seeing things like this, and I know that a lot of these look like pollen scums, but it's not just pollen. This is a photo of the sample that was at Tuftonboro Neck last week underneath the microscope. The small two bean-looking things at the top, that is pollen. At the bottom, it's Dolichospermum, the species of cyanobacteria that we're seeing throughout the lake. In that specific sample, it did look like pollen from the visual assessment. It wasn't looking like, a typical green plant bloom on top of the water and things like that. So, as you can see from these photos, these blooms don't always present in the same way. Did you want to ask your question, sir?
Yeah, I looked at the map this morning, and it looks like, in addition to the beaches, the area from Edmonds to Wells and Island and Rawls has this infection. So how do you tell what it looks like? And how dangerous is it if you don't see anything that looks like it?
So your question is how dangerous is it to swim in, and what does it look like, or what should you know what to look out for? So Dolichospermum, which is the species of cyanobacteria that we've been seeing most prevalently around the lake, typically looks like all of these photos. It looks like a green scum in the water body. However, the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services and LWA is seeing these cyanobacteria masking underneath these pollen scums that we, are typically having for this time of year in our normal. So it doesn't necessarily need to look like green paint on the water or, some cloudy areas as well. Some of these photos you can see they have white striations in them as well. That's a very common description for them. But a lot of the times you're going to be looking for green, cloudy material, striations, both on the top of the water column and further down deep into the water column. In terms of risk for swimming, it really depends on the blooms. Not all cyanobacteria blooms are toxic, and just because a bloom may not be toxic in one location doesn't mean it's not toxic in the other, or if a bloom happens repeatedly in the same area, it doesn't mean that it could be toxic one time and not toxic another time. So it's very important to just use caution when it comes to these blooms, and when in doubt, stay out is what we're asking folks. It may have been. It's very possible. We are getting reports from all over the lake, all over Winnipesaukee, in areas like the Broads, which we don't typically see these blooms. There's another type of cyanobacteria that we often see later in the season. It's called Gliotrichia. It almost looks like little small brown fuzzy pom-poms floating up and down in the water. And unfortunately, we're seeing that recently as well in very trace small amounts, but it's very early in the season for that. One of the reasons why, in addition to nutrient loading, cyanobacteria feed on sunlight, nutrients, and are also impacted by water temperatures. We had a very limited ice-in this winter with almost no ice coverage. What that ice coverage does is it acts as kind of a blanket over the top of the lake, preventing any sunlight from entering into the water column. If we don't have that ice, plants, algae, and cyanobacteria have more sunlight reaching them earlier in the season and are more likely to grow. Any other questions on cyano stuff? Actually, you know what I would like to do? I really want to be able to share with you the Lake Smart program, and I want to have Chris some time to talk as well. So I'd like to hold our questions till the end, if that's okay with everyone. And I'll skim through this, and I'll be around afterwards if you have additional questions as well. So how do we protect the lake? We have multiple programs and projects that allow us to connect with towns and people within the watershed. So we have lake management plans. There are 10 sub-watersheds for Lake Winnipesaukee, and we have completed 7 out of 10 of these watershed management plans, and they identify pollution sources and create an action plan to be able to mitigate high-impact sources of that pollution. We also do lake restoration projects. The watershed management plans identify sites that are in need of work. So we've identified over 275 projects just within those 7 watersheds. We also have a water quality monitoring program. There's 67 sites that are monitored from June to September with over 40 volunteers around the whole lake. That data is used to track long-term trends, help inform the watershed management plan modeling, and just overall the health of the lake. These watershed management plans are only done on public property. We're not allowed to go on private property at all. So a couple ways that we have been able to connect with property owners within the watershed is our Winnie Blue and Lake Smart program. And we coordinate with New Hampshire Lakes to be able to do so. It is an education, evaluation, and recognition program. So the way that it works is that any property owner within the watershed, whether you're shorefront or not shorefront, can go on our website, complete this self-assessment at the link. You can, you'll get a very generalized report for your property of things that you can do. After that, LWA will contact you and see if you want a site visit, where we'll actually come to your house with you, walk your property, listen to your concerns, and provide lake-friendly recommendations that are simple and effective. If it turns out that you implement those recommendations, or maybe you've been lake-friendly from the start, you'll receive this Winnie Blue and Lake Smart Award on the left. So it's a weatherproof sign that you can either put out by your docks or maybe by your mailbox, and just tout to your neighbors that you're Winnie Blue Lake Smart and doing the right thing for our lake. Again, this is a voluntary program. It is non-regulatory. We really work on this program for it to be an education program and work with you to educate property owners in the watershed for things that they can do to protect the lake. A large amount of phosphorus loading to our lake is from those residential sources. So we look, So during the property visit, we look at different sections, walk different sections with you. One of those are driveway and parking areas. So in the photo on the left, you can see piles of the pine needles indicating the direction that runoff or stormwater runoff is flowing and where erosion is occurring. Having a well-maintained pervious driveway, or even just recrowning your driveway to redirect stormwater runoff away from the lake is one way to be able to battle that. Unlike traditional pavers, with the permeable paver on the right, rain and runoff are able to soak through that pervious surface and soak into the ground while providing some stable surfaces for vehicles and foot traffic. If we think about a lot of our driveways, a lot of our roads, they're asphalt, so it's impossible for that stormwater runoff to soak up into the ground. It just gets redirected into a different location. We also talk about structures and septic systems. So in the picture on the right, you can see the roof line from the house, the infiltration trench that's kind of occurring from the runoff coming down through the roof and just over time hitting that spot on the lawn. You can help that runoff soak into the ground and slow down by providing some more surface area and adding some rocks underneath to help catch that if you don't have gutters. That's just one of the examples. We also look at yard areas, recreation, and footpaths. So the photo on the left shows an example of a gravel driveway that was being washed towards the lake. And then the picture on the right shows some pervious walkways that are made out of traditional pavers or really large flat flagstones with crushed stone or natural mulch underneath, again, to help soak up that runoff water before it has the chance to enter the lake. Lastly, if you're on the shoreline, we'll take a look at that with you. Vegetated buffers, meaning vegetative plants between the lake, help slow down and naturally filter stormwater runoff. It's kind of our last line of defense. So what we like to say is the bigger the buffer, the better. And you can see that on the bottom left. It's almost difficult to even see the house from the lake in that photo because of the amount of vegetation that they have. Wave action can also take a really big toll on shorelines. So sediment washing into the lake can bring in phosphorus, which, like I said, is that nutrient that controls the growth of plants, algae, and cyanobacteria. So increasing native plants on your shoreline can help to stabilize the soil and keep your soil intact. And what we mean by native is plants that are meant to be in our area. You know, things like our turf grasses that a lot of us have on our lawns, maybe a Kentucky bluegrass or something like that. The root structures for those types of grasses and other plants are very short. They're very, very small. So in terms of the amount of runoff that it's able to uptake and nutrients that it's able to uptake, it's minimized. Other plants, native plants, have really, really deep root systems that can go further into the ground, not only helping to filter that runoff, but also helping to keep your shoreline stable. Another way that phosphorus can get into our systems is through our beaches as well. If you have a man-made beach, you can prevent sand from being worn and washed off by minimizing how often you replenish your sand, but even better would be considering retrofitting the area with a perched beach. You can see that in the top right on the photo. It's up out of the water, so any wind or wave action doesn't have the chance to go over that wall and pull all of that sand into the lake. Also, stone or wooden stairs in the bottom right photo can provide some access to and from the water, if that's something that you're concerned about. Fertilizer is a contributor of phosphorus to our water bodies. Fertilizer, the number in the middle is the amount of phosphorus that's present. We participated in a phosphate-free fertilizer campaign and have for the last couple years with our participating retailers. We have these rack cards that are also available on that front table. And we're asking people to look for that zero in the middle and buy phosphate-free to minimize the amount of phosphorus entering our lake. On the back of that, there's also some extra tips for landscaping on the shorefront, how to test your soil before fertilizing. Most New Hampshire lawns that are established do not need phosphorus fertilizer. There is an upcoming legislation that's already been passed by the House and Senate. It's called HB or House Bill 1293 relative to the use of certain fertilizers. So no lawn fertilizers, according to this bill, will be able to be sold at a retail store and include phosphorus unless it's for establishing a new lawn repair, or if a soil test indicates that phosphorus is needed. The application's going to be prohibited during and before heavy rain events and on saturated or frozen ground. The legislation also includes requirements for certain signage about the impacts to water resources and laws relative to these fertilizer applications at retail stores. One other thing I just want to say about the Lake Smart program is that it's very possible to tailor your property aesthetically the way that you want it in a way that can also be beneficial to the lake. So this program is working with property owners to be able to work with you and see what you want on your property and figure out ways that we can redirect stormwater runoff, that we can, maybe get your septic system pumped out more often than you have been and educate you on some of the regulations or best practices really with that. So it's very tailored to what you would like on your property in the sense that the reason why we're doing that is to protect the lake. So if anybody has any questions about the Lake Smart program or cyanobacteria or anything like that, I'd be happy to answer for maybe 5 minutes or so. We are thankfully doing this program with Wentworth Watershed Association, as well as Miracle Farms Landscaping. So Chris Maroon is here today, and he's going to talk with you a little bit, but I can give you about 5 minutes to answer some questions. And again, I'll be around after if you'd like to chat. Yes. Yep, so warnings are issued when cell counts exceed 70,000 cells per milliliter. So what happens is New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services will collect a sample either themselves or if whoever reported the bloom can collect it and bring it to Concord. They'll look at it, analyze it, and look at the cell density. And if that cell density is over 70,000 cells per milliliter, it's thought to be a potential health risk. So an advisory is issued if that cell density, it's called a warning now, not an advisory, which is a little bit confusing, but the warnings will be implemented if over the 70,000, and alerts are just saying there's cyanobacteria present in the water, but when the sample was looked at, the cell densities did not exceed that 70,000. Yes. No, unfortunately not. There are some testing kits, but they're extremely, extremely expensive, and it's not something that the general public or even difficult for us to be able to do. And the other thing is, in terms of water quality and sampling, there could be, there's cyanobacteria in our waters all the time. They've been around for 3.5 billion years. They're very important. They're one of the first primary producers of oxygen. And so they're a really important part of our system. But when they proliferate due to those excess nutrients and sunlight and warm water temperatures, that's when we're seeing these blooms. Yes. No, so the water quality monitoring program that we have is run through UNH Lake Slime Monitoring Program. So we are testing certain sites around the lake for total phosphorus, chlorophyll A, dissolved color, and water clarity. The only way for an advisory or an alert to be issued with the cyanobacteria is for the bloom to be present, for the sample to be collected, and for DES to be able to look at it. So if you have a shorefront property and you don't have a bloom present, then sampling may tell you if there's cyanobacteria in there, but it's very likely that there may be some there already. The bloom is really the main concern. The New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, they have a harmful algal bloom program. There are links on our website, or you can just type into Google NHDES reporting, HAB reporting tool or cyano reporting tool, and it'll pop up. It's an app on your phone. You can take photos, provide location, give some general information. And there's also some protocols on NHDES's website if you'd like to take a sample yourself and drop it off to Concord. Any other questions yet? Yep. That's a great question, and we're waiting to see as well, so stay tuned. Also, if you sign up on our website for if you become a member, if you sign up for our email alerts, we'll be providing updates on that. It depends. It depends on the bloom. It depends on the potential toxins associated. There's a lot of varying factors with that. Blooms tend to stick around. They can last for, 15 minutes, 45 minutes, couple hours, couple days, couple weeks, months in extreme situations. Sure. So, great question. We are telling people to do a visual assessment, a self-assessment, and look at the water. If you're not seeing any blooms or scums or, really heavy particulate matter up and down in the water column, if the water looks normal to you, and especially if you're, someone that swims there regularly or something like that, then you will most likely be okay. But at the end of the day, it really is your best judgment. In terms of timing for that, the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, when they issue a warning or an alert, they will go out and take a sample a week later. So depending on what their results from that are, they will either continue testing and the warning or alert will be continue, or it will be removed and then is safe to swim. Yes. Had what? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I know you said you've tried to talk to them. I would continue to do so. You are more than welcome to share this program with them as well. Perhaps that could maybe change their mind, especially with the amount of cyanobacteria blooms that we're seeing. If they're realizing that perhaps their practices are contributing to that excess nutrient loading, perhaps they'll change their mind. Wentworth Watershed Association is doing their own, some very, very similar programs, so I would reach out to Julie, and she can give you some more information on that. Okay, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Chris. You ready? Okay, sounds good. Come on up.
Hi, good afternoon. Oh, you gonna try and put it on? Okay, yeah, I mean, if you can't do it, it's all right. It's not, it's okay. My password, though, is MMSASSEN. Otherwise, don't worry about it. You're getting way too worked up about it. So, my name's Chris Maroon. I'm with Miracle Farms Landscape Contractors. We're up in Moultonborough, and we also have a branch in Meredith right near Moulton Farms, but it's really just a location where we supply materials for our use around the lake. We don't man it, and so it's really there more for show than anything else. I'm not really great at public speaking, but I'm going to give this a shot because the cause is something that I truly believe in. So over 25 years that I've had my company here, we've been governed by regulations surrounding work on and near the lake. And often is the case, it's only discovered much later that regulations should have been different. So we in the industry have evolved in order to preserve the resources that we have. And it's actually nice to be governed by education and be part of a solution that will benefit all of us. A trip by water around Lake Winnipesaukee would tell most people that the regulations that were in place for many years didn't really serve to protect the shoreline and the lake adequately. And we have really got our work cut out for us. But like a good landscape, the industry's dynamic, and it's evolving, and it's always changing. What I know is, as is always the case, when a large shift in thinking is required, the solution really has to be accessible. People need to know that small things can make a difference, okay? It's very unlikely that I will have a client with a large lawn area call me up and say, hey, Chris, can you remove all this lawn and naturalize it for me? But the answer to this is we have to do things one plant at a time. And so small efforts by many people will definitely make a difference. I've been here 26 years, and we've had a home up here since 1985. And over those years, it's unbelievable how the regulations have changed. Way back in the late 80s, people used to back dump trucks up and dump beach sand right in the lake and create beaches. Today, they might shoot you if you did that. So regulations have changed and people's thinking has changed. It can sometimes feel like you're paddling upstream, you know, when you do everything possible to support and protect water quality, and your neighbors are not quite on board with the movement yet, as in your case. But we found that great solutions by working with clients and their neighbors can help to create native plant zones in the shared boundaries of properties where both homeowners enjoy the benefits of these areas. Less lawn area is a great and easy place to start. Rain and watering can wash fertilizer right out of your yard, out of your garden, and into the lake. I think that's obvious. Most of us think about that. But fertilizer buildup in the water results in the aquatic plant growth and algae blooms, which hamper swimming, boating, and they actually kill the fish and the wildlife. So there are solutions to this, and we like to believe that native plants are the solution. Why native plants? because they require fewer pesticides and fertilizer, and actually, once they're established, they require less water than your more hybridized and ornamental varieties. They help manage the watershed wherever they are growing. And if you think about the natural way that it works around the lake, we have a lot of low bush blueberry growing low along the shoreline, or you have blueberries high bush growing, and a variety of other plants. The idea behind that is as that water flows down, it gets filtered through those plants. And believe it or not, a lot gets caught up in that. And then the water that's pure and clean is what ends up in the lake. But what is a native plant? You know, I struggle with this often, because a native plant is a species that naturally occurs within a specific ecosystem without any human intervention. And they share an evolutionary history with other species in that area. So these relationships make them crucial for the health and productivity of that ecosystem. There are tons of resources online to guide your choices for native plantings. And I'd be happy to furnish names and numbers of some of the better locations that offer this. But there's a large range of what different people consider to be native. You have purists that only consider historically, naturally occurring, grown from seed to be native. And I am often asked about cultivars and if they work in the landscape as well as the native version. Cultivars probably make up 95% of the plants available at most of the nurseries. And, you know, that is unfortunately what we're all exposed to. You can only get what you can get from your local nursery. And, you know, they've been modified to encourage different traits in the plant to make it more desirable in the garden. It could be for height, maybe bloom size, color. There's a variety of things, but usually some trait that has to do with how the plant looks as opposed to how it actually performs. And there are a few studies where they look at the effect of the cultivar on the local insect species. And the results are varied, depending on exactly what was genetically modified. One study showed that plants modified with darker leaf colors, taking a green leaf and making it red or purple, actually discouraged insects feeding. There are other studies, though, that show feeding improvement. So cultivars are not always a bad thing. Sometimes the real native purist might lead you to believe that that's the case. There's a great nursery. They're a grower that we buy from. They have all their plants are grown in New Hampshire, and they actually custom grow plants for us. So when we're looking for certain plants and we need them in large quantities, they will go out and grow them. You know, it's a lengthy process, but you know, what it's about is trying to make that move towards the direction that's going to save the lake and save the surrounding areas. And most of the time, it's not necessarily the cheapest way to go, but at some point, you have to consider, you know, what your ultimate goal is. We have a lot of products that are natural and native because, for example, when we're doing an entire shoreline restoration, our goal is to try and create something that's going to allow that filtering effect to happen from water flowing down. And, you know, we can plant perennials or different native species plants, you know, 12 inches on center, but you're still going to have that space in between. And if you don't put something down to protect it, be it mulch, be it, you know, leaf matter or something, if you get a large rainfall, it's going to wash that material into the lake. So we have a supplier, actually two of them, that are in the great north woods of Maine, and they go in and they cut big pads of hay-scented fern. So we call it our hay-scented fern sod. So what we do is we'll get a pad probably the size of this table, might be 2 square feet, and they cut the ferns down with a line trimmer, and then they dig it out with probably 2 to 3 inches of soil. And we get those pads. If you've ever been to Florida, you see how they do the sod down there. It comes in these big squares. It's similar to that. We can actually take that, do a light prep of the soil, and then lay these pads one on top of another. And almost instantly, the sod starts to regenerate. And we give it water, and within a 3-week period, we'll have a stand of hay-scented fern that is completely full, like what you see on the sides of the highway. So that's instant protection. The other product that we get is low bush blueberry sod. Comes in the same little squares. We take it, we piece it together, and it eventually grows and knits in. But when the water flows off, it hits that and filters out. There's also a couple of other varieties, the native berries. You can get native berry sod. You can get sheep laurel, which is, you know, it's a small plant that looks very ragged, but it gets a beautiful flower in early June, and we get that in the sod at times. So there are ways to, you know, make that work. And if you or anybody you know is ever looking for that product, feel free to give us a call. We'd be happy to get you in touch with the person who supplies it to us. I'm not really sure how many people here understand the laws and regulations along the lake. Just as a brief show of hands, does everybody know the setbacks and all of those rules? So most of you do. So it governs what we do every single day. And if I were going to give you the short version, there is what they call the reference line, which is the water line. Lake Winnipesaukee is at 504.32 feet above sea level. That is the line. Anything below that belongs to God, and you can't go there. But above that, you have a 20-foot setback, and then you have a 50-foot setback. And then they start on the northern or the eastern border of your property, and they count 25 feet by 50 feet. And in those zones, you have to have, at least for the state, 25 points. And every tree has a different point system. So if it's a 3-inch caliper tree, they give you 2 points. If it's a 6-inch caliper tree, they give you 4 points. And the goal is that you have to have at least 25 points in that section. Now, a couple of years ago, it used to be 50 feet by 50 feet. So if you had a large stand of trees on one side of your quadrant, you could eliminate everything else, and it opened up the lake. And I'm sure if you drive around and you go to different towns, you can see how that rule modified things. They then got smart and they decided to cut it into 25-foot sections, same point requirement, but now you had to keep 25 points in this zone and 25 points in that quadrant. The one thing to be careful of is every town has a different point system. So Moultonborough, where I live, has a 50-point system in each one of those quadrants. So although the state says 25 is good, the town of Moultonborough says you have to have 50 points. So you have to be careful with what you take down. The other thing that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of is that in that area behind the reference line, anything 250 feet back is under New Hampshire Department of Environmental Service jurisdiction. So the first 50 feet, you can't dig a stump, you can't strip the soil, and there's a lot of very strict rules that happen within that area. Then you have what they call 50 feet to 150 feet. That is usually the setback of your house. So your house sits at 50 feet from the lake, and you can build it wherever you want. But there's a lot coverage rule that comes into play, and you have to be 50 feet back, and you cannot cover with non-permeable surface more than 30% of your lot. And I know this is going to sound complicated, but within that 50 to 150 foot mark, you have to keep 25% of that area undisturbed. So if you're building a house, and I'm making this up, but you had 100 square feet, out of that 100 square feet, you would have to build and disrupt 75 square feet of area. The other 25 has to be kept natural. Now, Wolfboro has a 35% native untouchable area. So again, you have to be aware of that. And then the areas beyond 150 to 250, the regulations loosen up from there back. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that if you're going to dig in the zone, either in that 50-foot zone or 150-foot zone, you actually need to get a permit in order to do that, if you're going to use a machine. So if you're going to plant a tree and you're digging with a shovel, there's not a problem. You can plant as many trees as you want. But if you have to use an excavator to dig the hole, or you need a skid steer to bring the tree down, you have to get a permit. And they've tried to make it easy by creating a PBN, which is a permit by notification, but your total impact cannot exceed 2,500 square feet. And what they look at for the total impact is where your access point is from your driveway. If your machine's 6 feet wide, it's a 6 feet path down, and then how much area are you gonna, disrupt to plant that tree? So some of these larger landscape projects just can't be done with a permit by notification. But if you want to fix a patio in that area or add a patio in that area, the permit by notification helps. And that is a permit that typically can get turned around in about a week. So it really helps keep things moving. But the state is pretty strict, and in past years they didn't have the help to really keep a track of what everybody was doing, and so neighbors are the way that things get reported. But one of the things you should always check for is if a contractor's doing work on the property, they will have a permit posted on the water side, and they should have a permit posted on the roadside. And as long as they've got a permit, you can pretty much rely on the fact that what they're doing is what they're supposed to be doing. A lot of people call the state and they complain, my neighbor's digging up, his backyard, and he's doing this and he's doing that. And the state has mandated that when you apply for a permit, anybody who abuts your property has to be notified that the work is happening. And the reason they do that, a lot of people think it's so that you can go to complain to the state that you don't want them doing that work, but it's actually more there so that people know that the neighbor is doing work and that they've actually applied for a permit. So I'm not saying don't check what your neighbor's doing, but calling the state to let them know that that's what's happening is typically more aggravation than anything. But you can go on the Department of Environmental Services website and you can actually look up the permit that your neighbor has. All you need to know is either the address or their name. So getting back to what we can do, we are largely in favor of rain gardens. I'm not sure who knows about rain gardens here, but typically one of the things that we do when we're designing a new landscape is we look at water flow and how is the water going to be affected. And there's very few properties that I've been to on the lake where the lake is actually higher or on a level playing ground. The lake is usually lower and most of the water flows into the lake. So one of the things we do when we're designing a landscape is we try and capture all that water and we try and channel it into a certain location where we can manage it. And it's called infiltration. And the idea behind it is if you can capture all that water and channel it into an area that's been dug out and prepared with larger stone and then smaller stone, and then we make a mixture with topsoil or loam and mulch and sand. And we put that in the top 12 inches of the rain garden depression, and you can actually plant in that. But what happens is, as that water flows down and it hits that mixture, it infiltrates and it goes back down into the ground and finds its natural settling place, which is usually into an aquifer or so on. A lot of people think that water goes into the lake. It really doesn't. It goes down through the bedrock and into the areas below the lake. But, slowing the flow of water down and storing it, for future use if you have a tank or, other reasons. We have properties where we capture that water and we use it for irrigation or, other uses. It's really an obvious way to solve the problem of water runoff. It's pretty easy. Bree mentioned it earlier. When you're on your property, you can look and you can see how those pine needles line up, and it'll show you an exact path of which way that water's flowing. And, it's really the way to look at it and then find the perfect spot for a rain garden. And it typically will present itself pretty easy. Things to consider in a prospective rain garden are, is the site fed by downspouts from a gutter? Is there a footing drain? Infiltration tests can show how much water the site can naturally infiltrate. The water table is a huge factor, and in many instances, when you're digging, you'll find that water table is 2 feet or 3 feet below you. So what does that mean? It just means you have to expand the size of the area to manage that. You have to be careful about trees, because you can't just dig a hole right next to an oak tree or a pine tree, because you're going to cause it to die, and that could be a problem down the road. As a rule of thumb, you should use native vegetation, and it should be incorporated into your rain garden. As I said before, native plants don't really require fertilizer. They've got great root systems and are better at utilizing the water and nutrients that are available to them. Perennials, shrubs, wildflowers, or a mixture of all three can work perfectly in these rain gardens. As a rule of thumb, avoid planting trees in your rain garden, because as trees generally absorb more water than the surrounding plants, and they also you should never plant invasive species or noxious species in a rain garden. You know that purple loosestrife that you see running around? It's terrible. And I know people that have plucked it out and planted it, and before you know, it's all over the place. So just be careful. They do have species that have been modified that are, you know, they don't reproduce, and you can get the same look, but it's much more environmentally safe. Planting a vegetative buffer is a good way to deal with this. And the elements of a good buffer is, you know, in order for them to be effective, they need to be situated between the lake and the developed area of your property. The purpose of the buffer is to slow down runoff so that the water and the nutrients can infiltrate into the soil and be filtered before they slowly get absorbed into the ground. Buffers should not have straight pathways through them, but by winding pathways of stable, non-erodible material. Straight pathways of bare soil act as channels for the pollutants and are easily eroded, as I mentioned before. Uneven ground surfaces with hummocks and depressions also help to slow down the runoff so water can infiltrate into the ground. Buffers should be as deep as possible and span the entire length or the width of the area that you have a problem with water on. So you have to figure out where that water's going. How can you create a buffer? Some people call them berms. The real idea is you have to create them so they trap that water and allow the water to infiltrate in between. Buffers can help, you know, prevent noise. They can give you privacy. We have many people who, instead of opening up their view to the lake, like the privacy, so they keep their buffer screen at 8 feet or 7 feet, and other people like to prune it as low as they can. To not get yourself in trouble with the government or the state, and also help protect the environment, they will allow you to cut your lakefront down to 3.5 feet. And most of the species that we have, if you cut them to 3.5 feet, they will regenerate and grow new growth on top of that. And once that starts to happen, if you're careful, you can maintain that 3.5 feet, and it'll eventually close off and look like it's been there forever. They also can help with the Canadian geese who tend to come up onto the properties, and they have, if you have a big expanse of lawn, they never land on the lawn. They land in the lake and they walk up. And if you've got a thick area, they really won't walk through that. So that's one way to deter the geese. And when we have people who tell us they have a goose problem, we try and encourage them to plant a buffer screen so that the geese don't come up, and we're now also trying to capture all that water that's running through their grass and bringing all those materials down and into the lake. These buffers are relatively low cost, and they're really easy to maintain. The objective should be to keep them natural and, not go in there and go crazy shaping it like it's a hedge in suburbia. Just pluck, prune it, and, keep it at the right height. You maybe have seen riprap boulders on the shoreline where maybe some of you have properties where the lake waves are smashing the shoreline and they're eroding it. You do need a permit, but the state will allow you to go in and take large boulders and set them with a machine and protect that shoreline. A lot of people want, a wall that comes right across their property and evens it out. You're never going to get that unless you have an existing wall that you can, prove to the state you're repairing a wall that was there. Otherwise, your best solution is to place these boulders and then interplant around them. There's also the core logs. Does anybody know about the log restoration? So if you've ever seen those silt socks that they use for erosion control, they're green, they look like a sausage. Well, they actually make those with a planting medium inside. And what you do is you line those up on the shoreline and you stake them and you set them back. So the first one goes here, and we put a second one behind it. And then in between that, we'll stack one going up. And then we'll backfill that with soil, and we'll continue to stake them and build this long meandering wall along the shoreline. And then you can buy plugs, and you just make a little cut into that sock, and you plant those plugs in that sock. And what eventually happens, if you fill behind them with a decent soil and you keep that well watered, you've actually created a native buffer with plants in it that are going to grow up. Those roots are going to grow into the shoreline and completely protect that shoreline. And now you've actually helped to salvage the shoreline and make the place a lot better. There are many great resources online to educate yourself on this stuff. But in New Hampshire, we are so lucky because we have the UNH Cooperative Extension Service, and they've got a paper pamphlet, and it's called Landscaping at the Water's Edge. And it's an ecological approach to the resources and to what you need to do to make your place better. They're really, really helpful. You can call them up. You can take soil samples of your soil around your property and send it to them, and they will send you the elements you have in your soil, what you need to add or take away from doing that. So I found that the best thing is if you have access to a boat, take a ride around the lake and just look at all the different properties that there are. And you can see who is working to make the lake better and who is not necessarily as interested in making the lake better. We do many, many projects all around the lake in all the different towns, and we are offered the opportunity to design these lakefront properties. And it's really amazing how you can make a property look really good, be very, very functional, and also help protect the environment. I don't know how much time we have left. None, right? Okay. I'm always wrong. I brought some native species plants over here. The pollinators are the perfect things to plant for. A lot of these plants here will attract the pollinators, bumblebees, all kinds of stuff, hummingbirds, monarch butterflies, you name it. And it's really amazing that planting a few of these in your yard can have a huge impact on that habit. The other thing is, I don't know how many of you are aware of the permeable pavers, but that 30% rule is something you have to think of. But come up and take a look at these and you can understand how they work to allow the water to filter through them and go down into the ground. Any questions? Feel free to come.
If anybody needs to go, or if you have questions, Chris and I are both going to stick around, so feel free to, or if you need to go, that's fine too. There's a Wentworth Watershed meeting tonight. Should be, thank you.